All right. So good morning, and thank you all for being here today. Welcome to this virtual space convened by UC Berkeley's Cannabis Research Center. My name is Michael Polson. I'm an anthropologist and research scientist in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley. For those of you who don't know, the Cannabis Research Center has been around since 2017. And since then, we've been addressing some of the more urgent, thorny questions around cannabis agriculture and farming, communities, environment, and policy. I invite you to check out our website, which is at crc.berkeley.edu. You can dive into our resources page, fact sheets, archives of past events and webinars, and the 40 plus peer-reviewed articles we published on this long prohibited and now burgeoning field of cannabis research. You can also sign up for our newsletter on the bottom of our homepage. Today, it's my pleasure to bring you this webinar on European cannabis policy. The Cannabis Research Center has been primarily focused on California and US-based cannabis research, but we see increasingly that legalization and decriminalization is sweeping the globe, and we're looking outward to engage with researchers, policymakers, and stakeholders to see what we can learn from different perspectives globally and to collaborate on future research. With that goal, we've set out to host this European panel today with the hope of hearing from other regions out there. We are very excited to hear from legal experts in Europe and look forward to learning from their experiences. Before we begin, thank you to the Resources Legacy Fund for making this possible, and a big thank you to Peng Lor for his hard work organizing this panel, and also to our moderator, Joanna Hossack, who has really pulled together today's event. Before turning it over to Joanna, a few instructions for audience members. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit questions as we go. You can also upvote existing questions. I think that's a thumbs up. And in the last 20 or 25 minutes, we're going to address those questions. Also, there's a react button if you'd like to share your reactions as we go. And you can also view closed captions. There is a show captions box next to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please note, the webinar is going to be recorded and reposted to our website, which I encourage you to visit today. Now I'd like to introduce Joanna Hossack, a researcher with the Cannabis Research Center. Joanna's been a cannabis attorney since 2014, working with clients across the supply chain, and has worked on cannabis research for UC Berkeley since 2021. We're currently working together on a Department of Cannabis Control funded study examining the extent to which local regulations influence the expansion or contraction of the unlicensed cultivation market. Without further ado, take it away, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning and good afternoon to those of you across the pond. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to be joined today by some of the leading legal minds practicing cannabis law in Europe. We're joined by Marie SANCHEZ from France, Robert Jappie from the UK, Daniel Haymann from Switzerland, and Kai-Friedrich Niermann from Germany. Before we hear from our esteemed guest, I'll provide a little background. More and more countries globally are beginning to regulate cannabis either medicinally or via an adult use or recreational program. And some are taking a more cautious and controlled approach by only legalizing medicinal use via a pilot program or a limited launch. And others are diving into adult use, and each is exploring a different pathway for expanding access to cannabis. We at the CRC see an opportunity to learn from each other and to benefit from the experiment of cannabis legalization across different legal systems and cultures. In a sense, each country's adoption of legal cannabis can be viewed as a social laboratory where policies can be tested and examined, and we can see what outcomes are emerging from different policies and strategies. Today, we'll be delving into cannabis policy in Europe with a particular eye to looking into the future to predict how the US cannabis market could one day engage in commerce with other countries. As many of you know, at the moment, given cannabis's Schedule I status, there aren't opportunities for exporting cannabis. However, if cannabis is rescheduled or descheduled, US producers and manufacturers may one day have an opportunity to engage with the global market. We are here today to learn about different approaches to cannabis legalization in Europe with the ultimate goal of building a well-regulated, integrated global cannabis system that provides for economic opportunity and diverse medicinal and recreational products, while also protecting public health, safety, and the environment. So to give you an idea of today's format of the webinar, we will be ending at 8 a.m. We're going to start first with the panelists introducing themselves, then we'll move into a structured discussion, and at the end, we'll invite you, the audience, to ask questions. So throughout our discussion, as questions arise, please put them in the Q&A feature by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please do not put them in the chat. So let's dive in. I'm going to invite each panelist to introduce themselves, provide a brief overview of the status of legalization in their country, and then we'll move into the discussion. So let's start with Robert. Can you please tell us about your work at Fieldfisher LLP and what's happening in the UK cannabis market?
Thank you, Joanna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you great.
Okay, great. So I'm a partner at Fieldfisher. Fieldfisher is a European law firm. We're headquartered in London, but we've got offices across all major EU countries. I'm a regulatory specialist on emerging life sciences sectors, and cannabis probably makes up about 75% of my practice at the moment. I established the UK's first dedicated cannabis regulatory department about 6.5 years ago now, and back in early 2018, we had a booming CBD industry, CBD sort of health and wellness sector here in the UK. It was growing very quickly, and by about 2021, we were the second largest CBD market in the world after the US. Unfortunately, the government stepped in and imposed some fairly heavy-duty regulation on the sector. And it's really sort of slowed down the growth of the CBD industry here in the UK. There are still some companies that are doing well and making good revenues. But the reality is the exciting part of the sector now in the UK is the medical market. So today is the 6-year anniversary of the legalization of medical cannabis in the UK. So it's great timing. Next week is Medical Cannabis Awareness Week in the UK. So there'll be lots of events going on. And so on the 1st of November 2018, the UK government legalized medical cannabis, much to everyone's surprise. It happened really quickly. There was, over the summer that year, there was a big media campaign in respect of mothers of sick children who had severe epilepsy, and they were traveling to the Netherlands to get medication for their children. And as they come back into the UK, they'd be stopped at the border and the customs officers would take the medication from them because it wasn't legal. And this was on the front page of every newspaper across the country. And public opinion swung very quickly behind legalization. The Home Office here did a 6-week consultation and legalized medical cannabis very, very quickly. It's unheard of for the UK government to move as quickly as that. Since then, the growth of the medical cannabis industry in the UK has actually been pretty slow. It's only in the last year or so that patient numbers have really started to pick up, and we're breaking through the 50,000 patient number, which is still very, very small, particularly compared to countries in Europe like Germany. But recent studies show there's anything between 1.4 and 1.8 million people in the UK who are self-medicating with cannabis from the illicit market. So the expectation is in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we should be able to move 3, 4, maybe even 500,000 across from the illicit market into the legal market. And that's the key here at the moment. We are working hard to get awareness out into the public, into the general population, because there's still a huge amount of stigma attached to cannabis, firstly. And secondly, there's a big lack of awareness here in the UK that medical cannabis is even legal. Even 6 years after its legalization, recent studies show that more than half the population didn't even know that medical cannabis is legal here. So we're working very hard to address these issues, but it's not easy. So in the UK, we have a very different culture in respect of medicines and medical treatments compared to that of the US. So whenever I go on holiday to the US, I go to my hotel, I turn on the TV, and it seems like every other advertisement is for some sort of medication or medical treatment. We do not have that here in the UK. There is a general prohibition on advertising and promotions of prescription medications. So we have this really unique situation in the UK where medical cannabis is legal. You can go to a clinic and you can see a doctor and you can get a prescription, you can get your product the next day. But the companies, the clinics, they cannot actually promote anything to do with the product at all. They cannot talk about cannabis. They cannot talk about how great the quality of their cannabis is. There are lots of companies now advertising versus mainstream media channels about their services, but they can't actually even use the word cannabis. So we have television ads for medical cannabis clinics promoting their services on TV, on primetime television, and they can't actually use the word cannabis. The advertising regulators won't permit it. So you can imagine it's very, very difficult for these businesses to actually bring awareness to the general population that we have a legal medical cannabis industry here. But again, like I said, everyone is working very, very hard to change that. In terms of adult use, recreational legalization, it's not really a serious conversation here yet in the UK. I think everyone has reached the conclusion that we need to grow the medical market first. We need to get people into the legal medical market. We need that stigma to fall away. And once you start to hit 300, 400, 500,000 patients, then the expectation is everybody will know somebody who has a medical cannabis prescription. You'll work with people that take medical cannabis, and it will be far less of a controversial topic and discussion point. And I think it's at that point, once we maybe get up to those kinds of numbers in the medical market, then you can start having a serious conversation about further legalization. So that's the current situation here in the UK. As I said, majority of my practice is cannabis regulation. I help all kinds of cannabis companies with all the day-to-day regulatory issues that they face, and that's obviously graduated to full regulatory support for the corporate commercial transactions as well, the acquisitions, the IPOs, the fundraisers, and that sort of thing. So I think that's probably a good overview of what I do and the situation here in the UK, and I'll hand back to you, Joanna.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Marie, would you please be able to share about your work and the status in France?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So I am a French lawyer. I am based in Paris, France. I've originally worked with the life sciences industry. So I'm a regulatory lawyer, and I represent companies from all sectors in the life sciences industries. And I've been advising the cannabis industry for over 6 years. Like for Robert in the UK, I mainly started with the CBD industry because it was what was first on the French, available on the French market. And we've had a fairly large CBD industry active in France, mainly because the industry benefited from a gray zone in the regulation for a very long time. And even though now the regulation has been clarified, there are still gray areas and legal loopholes, which allow, unfortunately, a lot of actors, not always the best ones, to enter the market. And the regulator does not always follow what should be done or not done. So that's what makes it complicated regarding the CBD industry. We also have medical cannabis. So medical cannabis is specific in France. A lot of countries around us have already legalized medical cannabis for several years. France is a specific case because why we have one of our largest community of cannabis consumers. Many of them are, like in the UK, self-medicating and not actually using it as a recreational product, but mostly to self-medicate. we have not generalized medical cannabis yet. So we had a pilot program that started in 2021, and that was made for and designed for 3,000 patients. At least I think about 2,500 patients remain in the program to date. This program was scheduled for 2 years and extended 1 more year, so it ended up being 3 years. And we've been in what we call the transition period since March this year. This transition period was supposed to end on December 31st this year, and then generalization of medical cannabis was supposed to enter in force in January next year. Unfortunately, due to the political situation in France and the fact that we just spent 4 months without a government, everything was delayed. So we still miss the orders and decrees that will implement the law that is setting out the legalization of medical cannabis. And without those orders and decrees, obviously, you cannot have a price or a reimbursement for medical cannabis, for instance, because I will talk about it later, but as many of you may know, in France, medicines are reimbursed by the Social Security and private insurances. And so that's obviously something that needs to be taken care of regarding medical cannabis, which is considered as a medicine in France. It's a medicinal product with an ad hoc status. So that what makes it specific and somehow different from medical cannabis as considered and exist in other countries. And finally, I think regarding adult use, we're absolutely not there yet. The discussion is not even on the table. And like Robert was saying about the UK, I think the conversation right now and the main priority is to have medical cannabis generalized and to have a clear, strong regulation on medical cannabis that will allow access for patients, that will also allow access to all the patients that are now self-medicating, because one of the downside of the current situation is that only the patients that were involved in the pilot program for the past 3 years can currently benefit from medical cannabis products. No new patient can be enrolled and can be prescribed medical cannabis until medical cannabis is officially generalized in France. So that's definitely an issue we're working on very hard to speed up the process and have everything in place as soon as possible. And I think the stigma in France remains really high, like in the UK. So the purpose is also to try and get rid of the stigma regarding medical cannabis. And maybe once this actually is clarified and less problematic, we will be able to have a conversation regarding adult use. But I really believe that both conversation, at least in France, shouldn't be mixed together in order to avoid controversial topics and discussions that we've had for too long now.
I completely understand that approach to really silo the industries. Thank you for sharing about the medical program. Daniel, could you please give us the lay of the land in Switzerland?
Hi, can you hear me well?
Can hear you great.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So my name's Daniel Haymann. I'm a previous commodity trader turned corporate and cannabis lawyer. I was the first cannabis lawyer in Switzerland. However, Robert, Jappie, and my friend Kai beat me to the punch on that one. I remember I called them up when I started my practice in cannabis and asked them what they are actually dabbling in their respective jurisdictions, and I was very inspired. So that's where I am today. I'm an attorney here with a Zurich-based law firm. We also have offices in Zug, quite large for Swiss standards. I am a corporate lawyer. but also now a life science lawyer, and especially in the cannabis sector, there's a lot of work in foodstuffs regulation, chemical law, cosmetics regulation. All these fields of law, they play together. And when the cannabis market here really started to take off in Switzerland, it was as same as in the other jurisdictions with CBD. So this is really where all of that started. And there was a lot of corporate activity as well. So I advise a lot on the JVs, M&A investments from foreign investors and also Swiss investors. So I'm having a lot of fun with this market. So where are we now in Switzerland? I would say the big boom in CBD is definitely over for now. Now there's certain new developments in Germany which create new opportunities, but CBD has been very difficult. And since medical cannabis has been legalized on the 1st of August 2022, a lot of my clients and other market participants started to focus on the medical opportunities. And when I say it was legalized, it essentially is no longer considered a narcotic drug if it is used for medical purposes. So it's still considered narcotic, but not a prohibited narcotic to be precise. And doctors have therapeutic freedom in Switzerland. They can prescribe it now for whatever they want, but same as in the UK, the awareness for medical cannabis hasn't really arrived in the general population. Just to give you some context, in Switzerland, I would say before it was legalized medical cannabis, we had between 3,000 and 4,000 patients, and each of those patients needed to go through a rigorous process to be able to, and which included a special permit that they had to obtain from the Federal Office of Public Health. It's the health ministry here. It was very complicated to get access. So only 3,000 to 4,000 people in that system, and out of an estimated, I would say 400,000 to 500,000 cannabis consumers out of a population of 9 million people in Switzerland, only 100,000 were using cannabis for medical purposes. These are the official numbers. Now, there may be much more, which we don't know. It's difficult to quantify, but still it shows that a lot of patients have been self-medicating, but they still don't get access to the medical market because it's too complicated. There's a lot of challenges and hurdles that are being put in their way. I'm not going to talk about this in detail. I can expand later if you like. And when it comes to the recreational, or let's say adult use market, this is interesting. The developments here are a bit progressed. We're not where Germany is today, but we have a trial period at the moment. So starting last year, pilot trials were introduced in Switzerland, and these pilot trials actually allow various market participants to apply with the Federal Office of Public Health to conduct scientific trials. And within the context of these scientific trials, to dispense cannabis for adult use purposes, be it in pharmacies or in special retail shops. And that's been really taking off here in Switzerland. The size of these trials can be maximum 5,000 people, but there's been some good traction. And in parallel to these pilot trials, there's also a development where a few years ago, there was a parliamentary initiative. It's a bit of a complex political system here to actually get to a law, but this parliamentary initiative is a first step that needs to be taken in order to get to legalization. First decriminalization, then legalization. Decriminalization we already have in Switzerland, by the way. And to get to full legalization, the political process is in full motion. So we have just yesterday, we had a meeting of the relevant committee to discuss how such a framework could look like. There's going to be additional meetings by the end of November, and we expect and hope to see a first draft for a legalized framework by spring, if you're very optimistic. And if you're a bit less optimistic, probably summer or autumn next year. And that should pave the way to full legalization. That we already know a little bit how this will look like. It might be something between, I would say, what we see in Germany today and what we have in California, with less prohibitive taxes, because they know that this is what would kill the market and basically defy the purpose of the exercise, but quite a pragmatic Swiss approach. I always say we're not the fastest in Switzerland, but when we do something, we do it right. So I hand it back to you now.
That's amazing. Wow, exciting times. I look forward to seeing how that all rolls out, and appreciate the thoughtfulness on taxes for sure. Okay, so Kai, would you please be able to give us the status, the lay of the land in Germany? Very excited to hear.
Sure. So I'm a lawyer since 2003. I had a pretty regular corporate and defense lawyer life since I visited my first cannabis conference in 2017. And by that time, the first CBD products came up, and no one really knew how to treat these products from a legal point of view. So I took a deep dive into that and started a blog on legal topics. And this blog was read by Prohibition Partners, so I wrote for them. That was read by MJBiz Daily, so I was invited to Canada to the MJBiz Daily conference, the panel together with Bob Hoban for the first time in my life on an international panel. And then I got to know the guys from the International Cannabis Bar Association, so I became a member there as well. And then since 2019, I'm decided to go all in. And since then, I'm exclusively representing and consulting medical cannabis import companies here, CBD companies, hemp companies. And I'm also the legal advisor of the European Industrial Hemp Association. They submitted a novel food application to solve the CBD issues, the CBD problems. And yeah, I was the architect of the consortium, the legal architect of the consortium. So that's what I'm doing here. And yeah, so Germany, as most as all of most of the states in the world, is a member of the Single Convention from 1961, and the following agreement from 1971, and introduced the Narcotic Act in 1971 according to these treaties. So the consumption, cultivation, possession of cannabis and all other drugs were regulated very strictly. And in 1982, it was also prohibited to cultivate hemp on the fields for the farmers. That lasted from 1982 till 1996. So in 1996, there was a reform so that the farmers could grow industrial hemp on their fields again. And then nothing happened till 2015. And 2015, there was a man, and he was a patient, and he sued the federal government, the Federal Republic of Germany, for being allowed to cultivate his cannabis at home for his medical purposes. And so, as is often the case, litigation changes things. He won at the administrative court, at the Federal Administrative Court, and so patients would have been allowed to grow cannabis at home for their as a medicine. Obviously, the German government didn't like that, so they set up Cannabis as Medicine Act and regulated the use of medical cannabis in Germany. Homegrown was not allowed, was still forbidden, but patients had the options to obtain medical cannabis there. By that time, we had 1,000 patients with an exemption for using cannabis, and then the market took off, literally. So we now import this year probably 40 tons of medical cannabis, 63% from Canada, followed by Denmark and the Netherlands. Probably no one really knows that because we don't count the numbers. So we have between probably 300,000 and 400,000 patients. So starting in 17 with 1,000, this is a huge growth. And then we saw the legalization efforts since 2017. There were the coalition negotiations after the last federal elections, and the Green Party was at the table and demanding cannabis legalization. But in the last minute, these negotiations were unsuccessful, and we got a new grand coalition, so they just continued their work. Cannabis was off the table, but I said in 4 years' time, we will have the same debate again, and then something will happen. And it came like this. The Greens are now member of the current government, and they really pushed that topic. But the government figured out that legalizing cannabis in Europe is a problem, not only due to the Single Convention from 1961, but also because of EU law, and especially the framework decision from 2004 prohibiting the cultivation and the possession and trade of cannabis explicitly. But what was not prohibited was home grow and collective home grow. So the German government stepped back. In the first step, they agreed on legalizing cannabis and dispensing for 2 adults in licensed shops. They gave that up and introduced this measure so that you have now you can possess 25 grams in the streets in public. You can possess 50 grams at home. You're allowed to cultivate 3 plants at home, you can establish a cultivation association with a maximum of 500 members and with a maximum of 50 gram dispensing per month. The government deemed that legal in terms of EU law. Many EU nations followed like this model. The Czech Republic is regulating it like this. Before that, it was Malta and Luxembourg who introduced a similar measure because everyone said, okay, this will be fine. This will be in accordance with EU law. And what's happening next is that there is a cannabis working group in the EU Parliament. And there were elections in the EU Parliament, and the new members of Parliament coming in slowly. And there's one German member of Parliament, René Repasi, and his working group, with bipartisan working group, and they want to start an initiative to change the framework decision so that every EU member state can legalize cannabis on a safe, firm, legal grounds. Don't have to fear interference by EU Commission or other member states, but this will last 3-4 years, almost the whole new period of the EU Parliament. And I assume that the next big steps, the next big changes and developments can only take place after this framework decision has been changed. So we have to live with the status right now. I don't think that we will have model projects right now or in the near future because it's too complicated, and the government is not prepared to go through all these steps to make model projects possible. Probably we will see what happens, and the medical market is still booming. So it's so easy. I saw a comment here in the Q&A. It's really so easy to obtain medical cannabis right now. Some companies offer just a questionnaire. So you just have to go through a questionnaire. You get your prescription half an hour later, and with this prescription, 2 or 3 days later, you have your medical cannabis at home. And you've never seen a doctor, only a questionnaire. Most of the companies, demand that you talk to a doctor on video very shortly, 5 minutes. And there is no restrictions on the indications, so it's for back pain, it's for headache, it's for as well as for severe conditions like cancer or AIDS treatment or whatever. This is criticized. Yes, it is criticized, but I think every gram which is not sold in the illegal market is a good gram. But we have to see how the professional medical organizations react to this, because and the president of our FDA, of our BfArM, he's talking about a system rupture we have never seen before, because it is deemed as a medicine, but you don't have clinical trials. You don't have an exact area of indication, of the scope. Nothing's missing, and we're just assuming that it helps against back pain or whatever. We know that it helps, but we can't tell exactly why. But this was a good development in Germany. So we have lots of patients, we have really fought the illegal market, and homegrown is exploding as well. So we are really doing good progress here right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's some exponential growth that you're experiencing. So that's wonderful to hear. So we're going to move into the questions that we've prepared. I'm going to ask them to the group and kind of go through each speaker to get their response. So this is going to be a comparative analysis, really trying to learn lessons from each other. So we've heard about lots of different timelines in terms of liberalization of cannabis policy for countries that are regulating later on and have the benefit of seeing what was done previously. How are they, or how are people in your country integrating those lessons and innovating on existing legal frameworks? So we'll go in the same order. Robert, would you be able to weigh in on that question?
So, I mean, I heard Daniel's comments on how Switzerland likes to consider things carefully and do things the right way. I'm proud to say the UK, we take the opposite view. We do things as easily and simply as possible with as little thought as possible, and then we leave it to the businesses to figure out how to make it work. So, in fact, there has been very little will within the UK to create bespoke regulatory environments for cannabis-related business, whether that's medical cannabis or CBD wellness. So what the government has done is just shoved these industries into existing regulatory frameworks that don't really, work very well. So right. In the case of CBD, they decided to impose the novel food regulatory regime on the UK industry. And it's been a disaster. It's been a complete disaster. It's achieving novel food compliance is it's very expensive. It takes a very, very long time. And it is a food safety model which is equivalent to that of a pharmaceutical approval process, right? So the amount of money and time and effort that CBD companies have had to put into engaging in the compliance process here in the UK has effectively killed innovation and growth in the sector, which is really sad, right? And what makes it worse is that CBD in the UK, there were no reports of sort of public health concerns or any public health issues whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And they've imposed this very heavy regulatory regime and obligations onto the sector. It's like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, right? And all that money that these companies were spending on compliance and engaging in this process, it could have been used for marketing and innovation and R&D and growth. So that's been a disaster, frankly. On the medical side, just going back to the story I told about how legalization took place and this media campaign about allowing these sick children to be able to access medical cannabis oils for their severe epilepsy. What happened was the government responded very quickly. They legalized, and again, they didn't create a bespoke regulatory environment. They put medical cannabis in the UK into the specials medicines regime, which is unlicensed medications, and it's not a good fit, right? It doesn't really work for commercialization. So you had suddenly all of these businesses, they're given a legal route to now supply medical cannabis to patients. and they've had to work very, very hard to try and create an environment where they can actually commercialize and scale this operation. And over the last 6 years since legalization, they've been asking the government for help, saying, look, you need to change the regulations to make things easier for us. And the government's response has been fairly, expected. You didn't ask us to create a commercial industry here. You asked us to give safe and legal access routes for very sick people to gain access to medical cannabis. We did that. We're not here to help you create a business out of it. So that's why growth of medical cannabis in the UK has been slow, because we've had numerous issues trying to work out how we can actually scale this industry and make medical cannabis accessible to the population. And I can see there's a question particularly about now how easy it is for patients in the UK to access medical cannabis. It's actually quite easy now. It is an unlicensed medication, so the vast majority of medical cannabis that's going to patients is paid for privately. So you can go and see a doctor in a private clinic. You pay a consultation fee. The guidance for the doctors is that you have to have tried 2 other forms of treatment before you're eligible for medical cannabis. And there's a very wide definition of what counts as a treatment. If I have a bad back, if I tried some ibuprofen, if I've had some physio, that would be 2 treatments that would make me eligible for medical cannabis. So in fact, most people will be eligible. And the price now of medical cannabis in the UK is very competitive with the illicit market. So again, it is not overly expensive from a financial perspective. So yes, in fact, it's not that difficult to gain access to medical cannabis here in the UK. Where we have had problems is, first of all, supply chain, sourcing high quality, reliable, regular supply of medical cannabis that meets the high standards that are required in Europe has been very, very difficult. We're starting to see those issues now being resolved, and there's lots and lots of good quality products now available on the UK market. The real blockage still is the doctors. There's still not enough doctors prescribing medical cannabis in the UK. The way that it's structured is that you have to be a consultant, so a specialist. So you have to be on the specials register to be able to prescribe. There's about 30 or 40,000 doctors in the UK that are eligible to prescribe. There's only probably about 150 who are actually doing it on a regular basis. So you can imagine, as the industry grows and patient numbers increase, one of the big problems for the clinics is having enough doctors to actually write the prescriptions, to do the follow-up prescriptions and consultations. So that's another thing we've been lobbying the government to try and expand the pool of doctors that are able to prescribe. And so far, the government has not been interested in giving us any help. So no, we don't take any notice of other legal frameworks. We don't learn anything from other jurisdictions. We just muddle through and, credit to the medical cannabis businesses here in the UK that are turning this into a success, because it's been a real hard road for all of them.
Amazing. I love that. Just go for it approach. Swing it. Okay, Marie, pose the same question to you, and I'm just going to add a wrinkle, which is, to what extent have you seen what's happening in California, and any thoughts on, that process in terms of what France is doing?
Yes, I think we discussed that before. I would say, to make it short, you take the Californian model and you imagine the opposite model for France. Basically, if you expect France to have a regulation that will allow doctors to prescribe medical cannabis on a post-it, and patients go to a dispensary and be served medical cannabis by the same person who's going to also sell dummies for a party on a Saturday evening, that is not happening in France. France has the reputation of being an extremely cautious country. Switzerland may be one of them, but I think we're even worse in that sense. That being said, I know France is looked at, this strange country that seems to take too much time to have medical cannabis implemented, and it's being criticized, and there are aspects of this that deserve to be criticized, in my opinion. However, I also think that unlike a lot of countries that rushed into legalization of medical cannabis without necessarily think everything through, and that ends up either with a law stating clearly that medical cannabis is legal, but not having the implementing text available, hence resulting in not having medical cannabis being accessible to patients, like this is the case in Mexico, for instance, or having countries that legalize everything, but you know, either have the products not available or have low quality products on the market. We are going for a complete different path. France is going with a pharmaceutical route. So medical cannabis is a medicine. It has an ad hoc status because it obviously didn't go through 4 stages of clinical trial, so cannot be delivered a marketing authorization like any traditional medicinal product. However, medical cannabis to be available and to be placed on the market needs to be allowed and delivered a use authorization by the French competent health authority. And these authorization will be delivered for 5 years, renewable. The products need to be finished products. So that's another difference with a lot of other countries. There will not be magistral preparation or manipulation by pharmacists. These will be finished products only. No flowers, for instance, or no smoking products. We used to have raw flowers allowed as part of the pilot program. This was removed from the generalization law for some reason. I mean, obviously political reasons, but it's not official yet that it's been permanently removed. We may still have some sort of raw flowers allowed. However, if it is the case, it will necessarily be used in some sealed device that will not allow manipulation per se. So we will still have a possibility to use raw flower as part of treatment, but it will be in a very secured way. The therapeutic indications also remain so far very limited because we can use medical cannabis only in 5 therapeutic indications. That being said, in the future, there is room for new therapeutic indications to be added, provided that evidence is brought to the authorities that it is working. So that will be something that we need, you know, the companies will have to work on, as well as pharmaceutical forms and developing new pharmaceutical forms. So far, we're using oils, cap gels, tablets, and extracts, but there is room, you know, to develop and to propose new forms. Probably inhalation is one of them. It was used as part of the pilot program with raw flowers. Could be used with extracts, for instance. So that's something that should be available as well. I think another thing that will have to be worked on seriously is physicians' involvement. We need to be able to provide physicians with enough and relevant information regarding the products so that they know that this is an option, that this is available, and they're engaged into prescribing those products to patients. The purpose being to have people who are in need and who are left without any existing solution regarding their treatment to benefit from medical cannabis. So the more physicians are trained and aware of how to use and prescribe those products, the more patients will be able to benefit from those products. So it takes time. We certainly are behind. However, I also believe that because of this legal framework and the strong legal framework, it will not only last longer and be a better option in the long run, but also for import of products from abroad, because obviously it may seem really complicated right now for a foreign company to imagine, how am I going to import my products, you know, because it's finished products. Yes, but if you meet the requirements that are set by French law, you have an opportunity. It's not going to be only French companies or, you know, European companies. There will be opportunities for people or companies who meet the requirements. I think, like, briefly, if I talk about the CBD market and the regulation, just to add to what Robert was saying regarding the UK, it's been a mess in France as well, for different reasons, though, because France had this position not to take anything officially. When the novel food regulation was implemented and decided, the European Union decided that CBD and cannabinoids were novel food, a lot of countries decided to remove everything from the shelves and wait until the European Union delivered the authorization for as a novel food. France didn't go that way, and a very little controls were actually run on the market, resulting in thousands of products and CBD food products being available everywhere, in CBD shops, in supermarkets, even in pharmacies. And most recently, I think after 3 years not doing anything or almost anything, obviously the number of products was so high that it wouldn't have made any sense for French authorities to remove everything. Why, you know, first of all, those products had been on the market for so long. Second of all, nobody died from using CBD. And so we ended up with this unofficial position from the French authorities that allow CBD food products to be on the market based on certain unofficial criteria. Nobody knows exactly what those criteria are. Nothing was published, so all we know results from controls that were run at companies and in industries, and so we know some criteria are used every time, but since nothing is official, we can't actually, it's very difficult to advise our clients and say, oh, you know, you need to have your products meet this and this and this criteria. So that has made things very complex, because obviously, if we think about legal security, it's a problem. Companies are somehow unofficially allowed to keep their products on the market, provided that they meet these criteria, but we don't know exactly what those criteria are. And so they may be controlled, they may not be controlled, and it's, you know, everything is at their own risk. And I think it would have been good for French authority to have the courage to take an official position. I bet a lot of other European member states would have followed, because this is a game in Europe right now about novel food. Like, nobody wants to take the responsibility to take the first step and to make the first courageous decision. But in the end, we end up with completely different positions in countries that are sometimes neighbor countries, and hence with completely different results on the market and risk for industrials as well. So I think this would also deserve clarification in the regulation. Hopefully something will change soon. I'm less optimistic than for medical cannabis, though. So I think medical cannabis remains the strongest regulation and the strongest part in Europe, at least for now.
Thank you. It's fascinating to hear that you're experiencing similar phenomenon in regard to the hemp CBD market vis-a-vis the cannabis market, and how it is essentially the same plant and they are treated in very different ways. So that's something I think we're all grappling with. So Daniel, can you please weigh in on this question about, to what extent Switzerland has taken guidance or inspiration from other regulatory frameworks?
Sure, with pleasure. Well, actually, the Swiss, what they usually do is they write a very comprehensive report and do an analysis on the various jurisdictions with pro and cons. So all of that is publicly available, which they did. And for the medical cannabis market, I would say they were inspired very strongly by Germany, which already started earlier in 2017, I think. And it's the same system. Essentially, there's some fully licensed drugs which have full market authorization, like Sativex and Epidiolex, but these are the only two ones, and restrictively applied, in fact. And then, same as in Germany, we have magisterial preparations, which includes oils, tinctures, and actually quite progressive, I think. I tend to disagree a bit with Marie. I think it's very progressive. Everything in the life science sector goes towards personalized medicine. And I think it's a great advantage for a doctor to actually be able to have a certain tailor-made formulation or whatever for its patients, for his or her patients. Now, obviously, it comes with a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge, which Robert already alluded to earlier, is education awareness. So awareness of consumers, but even more importantly, a complete lack of education of doctors. Now, slowly, there's some trainings emerging in the market, and people are learning, doctors are learning about endocannabinoid systems and how to deal with cannabis prescriptions, but it's still a major hurdle. And that, same as in Germany, took a long time for the medical market to actually kick off. And I think the same will happen here in Switzerland. It's a bit accelerated by the developments that we have in the adult use space and with what is happening in Germany, but it's still going to take time. So you wanted some granular details. I'm going to give you some reasons why medical cannabis is so challenging. For example, you need a very special prescription, which includes a paper-based prescription for a narcotic drug, paper. So a lot of the doctors, it's an administrative hurdle. It takes a lot of time to do that. They have no incentive to do it. Also, there is no self-dispensation in Switzerland for cannabis, which means that because it's a narcotic drug, you have a rule that you need to have a double layered, consulting process. So you need to be consulted at the doctor's office and at the pharmacy. So the doctor needs to prescribe, and then you need to go to the pharmacy and of course, it's not happening in reality because they just dispense it at the pharmacy. But this is how the rule goes. There's no reimbursement from the health insurance. And by the way, with the self-prescription, it's a big income driver for general practitioners. So in Switzerland, there's been a poll, and apparently 30% of the turnover for GPs in Switzerland is generated by self-dispensing, the Advils and stuff like that in their own premises. So that's not possible. So just to understand why this takes so much time and why it didn't really kick off. However, the mess that the Germans have created with their legalization, or I would say decriminalization, actually gave rise to some great opportunities for Swiss entrepreneurs and Swiss cultivators, because they now have an outlet where they can export their cannabis to, both flowers and also other products. And the Swiss are quite creative and have a lot of experience in pharma. So this creates some great opportunities for some of my clients. So we're focused on that. And by the way, I know it was a bit of a nap, but the reality is I'm fully on board with Kai's statement that every legal gram in the market is better than the black market or the illicit market. However, there is really this clear trend that consumers are becoming patients. And I'm not sure if that's where it should go. I actually advocate for a clear difference and a very clear boundaries between what the medical market provides for patients and what the recreational market provides for consumers. So on the adult use market, we have a layered approach in Switzerland. I'm not sure that they've taken this from anywhere. They just came up and said, you know what, instead of just legalizing the whole thing and see how it goes, let's just go through a first phase of pilots, of pilot trials, and gather this scientific evidence, and then always in conjunction with the research institution. And then we're going to evaluate these findings, and we're going to find what the best model is also. And there was a very comprehensive report made. The idea was essentially that the government's going to take these findings and then on that basis create a framework for a legalized model. But this is not what happened in reality, because we had a parallel development that pushed forward already an actual legalization for cannabis, which is what I described earlier. And these two developments are now a little bit working in parallel. So I also think it has an advantage because to some extent, the pilots that are quite visible and quite large scale already in the cities create a certain reality. And a lot of the population has realized that, you know, the country is not going under just because cannabis can now be dispensed in pharmacies. So it creates a certain reality here that's already embeds a certain mindset in the general population, which I think is great. And at the same time, there's this push for actual legalization, and this is really going forward. There's some findings that have already been published from the pilots, and I'm sure that as this goes along, the lawmakers will incorporate these findings into their reasonings to how to create the legalization. But there's actually been quite a comprehensive report, which was another initiative as well, but it basically as a parliamentary member, you can ask the government to create a big report on what the status is and how it should be done, and it was done for recreational or for adult use cannabis. And there, the findings, I can read them to you. There's some interesting stuff there. First, it should start with a strictly limited low-risk regulation that can be expanded. So probably they're not just going to open up the whole thing and see how it goes. It's going to be in steps. Refrain from a profit-oriented retail trade and excessive commercialization of cannabis. This is, for me, the biggest caveat. I'm not a big fan of this finding because I think that the highly profitable illicit market needs a profitable alternative, at least, to be successful. So, but at the same time, I do know that the Quebec model, you know, where the government's actually running the shops and so on, is not what the government is aiming to do here in Switzerland. So perhaps we will see some sort of licensed shop model, which I still believe is probably the best way to go. Then it says a comprehensive ban on advertising and promotion, which I think is good from my perspective for in the recreational sector. Clear restrictions on availability, opening hours, sales outlet density, and warnings on product packaging, all of that. The report reasonably specifies that the final sales price, including taxes, must not be so high that the illicit market remains attractive. Now, this is an interesting finding, and that's definitely one of the findings that were inspired by the US, and which probably is one of the biggest hurdles now, and the reasons why so many businesses are applying for bankruptcy. And why actually the illicit market really started to take off in California after it was legalized. So they're aware of that. And then obviously protection of consumers, safety standards, contaminant limits, declaration requirements, a full seed-to-sale solution. They're already using in a mandatory seed-to-sale solution, a software called Cannavigia in Switzerland. For all the pilot trials, they need to be fully transparent, and they're, I'm sure, going to apply the same, if not the same, the same standards or the same model for the legalized framework. Yeah, that's it for
that's incredible. I absolutely love to hear those sort of goals and the weighing of those different priorities. To hear it articulated like that is I'm going to have to check that report out, and I'll try to post it when we repost this video as well, so everyone else can take a look
It's
at
in German.
Okay, I'll have to brush up on
Yeah.
my German.
I can help you maybe translate it.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Kai, would love to hear from you. You're on mute at the moment. Yep.
Yeah, I want to point on a different aspect, and you may remember, as Germany legalized medical cannabis 2017, they also introduced a measure for domestic production, and that was a tender procedure. And it was designed that you got 11 slots, and 3 companies turned out to get a license. And the production quantity was reduced to reduced to 10 tons in 4 years. And it was obvious by the beginning that these quantities will never be sufficient to meet the demand of the German population, of the German patients. So we imported a lot of stuff till now. And since 1st of April, cannabis was removed from the Narcotic Act, so it's not a narcotic anymore officially, but a regulated commodity under the new law, under the KKG. But all restrictions in terms of domestic cultivation were lifted. So no restrictions on 10 tons for 4 years anymore. As long as a company can prove that it can produce cannabis according to pharmaceutical grade, which means GACP and GMP, they will get the license. This is the big question right now. How many companies will come from the US, maybe with the rescheduling in category 3, pockets full of money because of 280E is gone then, and the stock markets are thriving again like in 17 and 18. You can't imagine how many companies from the US and Canada were there here at that time. And we had over 90 applications for getting one of these licenses. This is gone right now, so there is not this rush like in 17, 18, but the interest is coming back slowly but steadily, because if you have enough money, if you have funds, if you can invest in a facility in Germany, I would advise you to do so, because there is Article 21 of the Single Convention, which is basically saying the more you produce domestically, the less you can import. If this regulation is really applicable, and if it will be applied by the German government, and if we have a protectionist situation like in Canada, where there is no import at all for medical cannabis, we will see. We will if that turns out, and how many companies are prepared to invest in cultivation sites in Germany is another question, because we know that it takes a lot of money. Needs a lot of money and time, and the cost structure is also very demanding, and it's a challenge in Germany to produce on an economically viable basis. So yeah, that's what I can add to this. I wanted to know that.
Thank you. So we do have a few more prepared questions, but I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. So please, if you have anything pressing, put it in the Q&A now. It looks like we do have one question for Robert about the UK, which is the regulator's approach to packaging and labeling requirements. Can you give us a little bit of a, high level what that looks like?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's a really hot topic here in the UK at the moment because, as I said, the medical market has been growing slowly, and it's been so small that, in fact, the regulators, the medicines regulator here in particular, the MHRA, hasn't really paid any attention to it. So there's been a lot of stuff going on in terms of packaging and labeling of products, which is completely non-compliant when it comes to prescription medications in the UK. So we have celebrity branded medical cannabis products available here in the UK. There is a UK rapper and TV presenter called Big Nasty, and he now has his own range of Big Nasty medical cannabis products available on the market. You know, and it's unheard of to have a celebrity branded prescription medication in the UK. We also, one of my clients is an excellent company called 4C Labs. They do import and distribution of medical cannabis here in the UK. They were importing jet fuel gelato from Canada, and they managed to get the packaging of the medical cannabis approved by the MHRA with a jet plane on it. So it had a jet plane on it, and you know, it was a very sort of wreck looking package, and everyone was like, how on earth did they manage to get approval of that? And in fact, that's my experience. The industry has been so small that the MHRA has not really paid too much attention or been too concerned. We're reaching a tipping point now. Now we're pushing past that 50,000 patients mark. We are starting to see reports from the regulators who have oversight of the various areas of the medical sector starting to take up and sit up and take notice. And they've said we want a multi-agency review. And what that means is as the industry grows, as it becomes more successful, there's going to be more scrutiny on it from the regulators. And one of these key issues is packaging of medical cannabis, right? And now we're starting to hear noises from the MHRA. They're going to start intervening on this type of thing. And that is problematic for Big Nasty Medical. Big Nasty himself does not hold any licenses. You know, he uses an importer and distributor and has his name and his brand put on the packaging. By the letter of the law, that's not allowed, right? It should be the license holder whose name should be on the packaging. So I think it's going to have quite an impact on how these issues are dealt with here in the UK as the industry grows bigger and the regulator starts to step in.
Excellent, thank you. So I have a question in the chat for Daniel and Kai, I think, but everyone else can weigh in. The person is struck by how common it is to import hemp and cannabis products. Is there a conversation, you touched on this a little bit, is there a conversation in your respective countries about creating domestic agriculture for cannabis and hemp, particularly as a matter of rural economic development? So
maybe I could start, Kai, if you don't mind. I could give you some flavor, for example, with the pilot trials. For the pilot trials to go through politically at the time, one of the requirements was that the grow is a soil-bound production, which means indoor production would not be allowed. So it has to be either outdoor production or a greenhouse. And it has to be Swiss. So they specifically excluded imports, provided that the Swiss can produce. So it was just as a fallback option included in the law that potential imports should be possible. That's just one possibility, to illustrate what they've done, not just from a protectionist point of view, but also to get on board more from a political point of view, the farmers and so on, to be able to push this through, because it required actually at the time a change in law. So the Narcotics Act had to be amended. This is one example. On the other hand, I would say in Switzerland, still the majority of production that is consumed within the country, both in CBD as well as in THC, which I said is still a small market, is domestically grown. Because Switzerland has been such a beacon in Europe for the CBD market, because a lot of the CBD market has really taken off in Switzerland. Huge production sites, very much experience in cannabis. It's a very cannabis strong market, let's say, Switzerland. Yeah, that summarizes it from Switzerland. There's plenty of grow here. Imports are not impeded in general. It's quite easy to import into Switzerland. It's not, the hurdles are not very high, both for CBD or medical THC. It's both possible. it's open, but it's not, we don't see it happen a lot. Some CBD from Colombia has arrived, some from South Africa. There's various jurisdictions where growing CBD, you know, when the market completely collapsed. Obviously, Switzerland is not the cheapest country in terms of labor and electricity and so on. You might find some imports as well, but still the brunt is not coming from abroad. Kai?
I think this question was directed at the hemp industrial hemp market, and these markets are quite different within the EU. Germany has 6,000 square hectares under hemp cultivation, whereas France has over 50,000. And France is increasing, Germany is decreasing last year. I'm working with the IHA, with the European Industrial Hemp Association. And the problem is that when you cultivate hemp, you need processing facility next to the fields. It doesn't make sense to cultivate it in one place and to ship the harvest 500, 600, 700 kilometers away for being processed. And this needs a lot of investment. This needs a master plan to develop a region, and it has to attract investors to build this, to set up this facility, this factory, this processing plant. And this is the big problem. This is missing, and this is what the IHA is fighting for, to create an ecosystem which makes it possible, with help of the EU, with help of the national governments, to force or to promote these options, so that it really gets used in cars as insulation material, as building material, as an alternative to all these carbon products we have right now. But it's still a long way to go.
Thank you. This next question from our guest is, I think Marie could answer this, but maybe Robert as well, and anyone can chime in. So the question is, how are you able to qualify items as medical without clinical trial data? That's it.
By creating an ad hoc status. We already have medicinal products that do not necessarily go through 4 stages of clinical trial. That's the case of plant medicines, for instance. So we already had other statuses for medical products. I think the challenge for France was to being able to have a legal framework to authorize medical cannabis while going over the stigma. And I don't think that was possible from a political point of view, at least in the recent years, to go with medical cannabis as it is heard and meant in a lot of other countries, which is having self-cultivation, having raw flowers that people can smoke. That wasn't, I think it would have definitely blocked the process of legalizing medical cannabis and offering access to patients. So they came up with this ad hoc status, also keeping in mind that at the European level, currently there are discussions about an harmonized status for medical cannabis, as they're trying to assess whether the status of medicine of established use could be used for medical cannabis. So nothing has been decided on that yet, but I think France, by choosing a medical status for those products, is somehow anticipating what may occur at the EU level in the coming years. So that's how they do. That being said, yes, that we may not have 4 rounds of clinical trials, but they're using real life data. which are data, even though they're not from clinical trials per se. And in the future, obviously, clinical trials are going to be encouraged, and that's something that is definitely missing in the cannabis industry, and that needs to be pushed forward.
Thank you. Robert, does the UK take a similar or different approach to, medicinal products not having undergone clinical trials, or what?
Yeah, so medical cannabis is generally prescribed as an unlicensed medication, so it doesn't have to go through the clinical trials procedure, provided we meet the standards required for medicines in the EU, then it can be imported and distributed on as I said, on a private prescription. The problem that causes is the lack of clinical data hampers the induction of doctors into the sector. Doctors are very, very reluctant to prescribe. The doctors are effectively the gatekeepers for this, right? So if a doctor is happy to write a prescription, then that's great. But a lot of the doctors, they don't want to get involved because they say, we don't have the data, we don't have the efficacy information, we don't have the support of the regulators, to get out there and do this. And a lot of the doctors are like, well, why should I risk my license, my reputation if something goes wrong, if the regulators aren't supportive? And that has been the case here in the UK. They are constantly citing the fact there's not enough clinical data, there's not enough efficacy data, there's not enough safety data. And they're also taking a very restrictive approach here. They won't consider the extensive clinical data that is available in other jurisdictions. They want it to be generated here in the UK. So we have this issue in the UK now where obviously medical cannabis is being prescribed. Some clinics are very good at collecting data from patients, as Marie mentioned in France as well. Most of them just want to sell weed, so the collection of data isn't such a high priority to them. So yeah, it's not necessary here, but it is a problem in terms of scaling the industry.
And following up on what you said, there's the possibility that cannabis will be rescheduled one day, maybe to Schedule 3, Schedule 5. That's all very speculative at this point, but you said that trials would have to be conducted there. If more research is done in the United States, to what extent do you think that would influence policies and research in the UK, or is it not really going to have an impact at all?
I think if rescheduling happens in the US, I think it's actually a pretty big deal for the European market. And the reason why is Schedule 3 is a product category that European medical and pharmaceutical companies will be very comfortable with. They will understand Schedule 3. So I'm very, very bullish. I think rescheduling in the US will have a massive impact in Europe. I think it could open up vast amounts of new investments, mainstream healthcare and pharmaceutical companies deciding this is the time for us to take a stake in the European market. They're not going to build something from scratch. They're going to go and find a business to acquire, or they're going to go find a business to invest in, an established business already. And, wherever the US goes, the rest of the world tends to follow. So I think rescheduling could be really, really exciting for the European market. I don't think you Americans realize how much stress your political situation causes us as well. We're all sat here waiting to see what happens next week. So yeah, what happens in the US has a big knock-on effect, and not just on the pharmaceutical and healthcare opportunities, but also for the financial institutions and the banks and the investment companies to have some form of federal legalization or category in the US, which is now formally legalized. That also gives them the comfort to then start providing their support to the European medical cannabis sector, which is something we really need. Banking is difficult. Sourcing investment from financial institutions and mainstream investors is difficult. So we hope that it does happen, but I see it's been put back again till the new year, right? Then the next hearing, yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to have to remain patient, I suppose. Well, we're getting close to the end here. I just wanted to ask one quick question to Daniel, because you kind of touched on this a little bit. If you could just boil it down to like 1 or 2 sentences, what do you think about the California cannabis market?
California is a big beacon of, it had a very important role, obviously, for everybody in Europe. In Switzerland, it's been a great source of inspiration, but also a great source of learning how not to roll out a legalization. California is, with a humble triangle and all these great strains and genetics and products that come out, and the product innovations, and it's like Candyland when you land there, and that's how it's perceived by the entire cannabis market here in Switzerland. I think in Europe, everybody's very excited about the potential to have also these genetics and strains arrive from California, for the, not just for the recreational market, but also for the medical markets. It's already a reality that it finds its way to the patients and consumers likewise. It also is known for everything's in cash, and very high taxes, and an impossible situation to actually build a sustainable business, and a very strong still parallel universe of black or of an illicit market. So it's an interesting perception, but definitely twofold. It's a double-edged sword somehow. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that reflection, and it's good for us to take that on and really sit with it, and hopefully continue to evolve and improve. So we were coming to the end of our time. I'm sure I could just listen and ask a million more questions, because this has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm so very grateful that you all took the time out of your day to speak with our audience and answer these questions. And I look forward to hearing more and seeing how this all unfolds in the coming years. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Michael Poulsen just to wrap up. And I really appreciate everyone joining us today.
Thank you for the
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Joanna.
everyone.
Thank
This was
you.
wonderful. Yeah, what an insightful conversation. I appreciate all the time the panelists have taken to share their knowledge and take part in the webinar, and also to Joanna for organizing and pulling this together. Thank you also to Penglor for his organization and thoroughness in pulling this together. And also again to the Resources Legacy Fund for their enduring support. This afternoon at noon, we're going to be hosting a research conversation series, the next installation, with Dr. Olena Sambuchi from UC Davis, to discuss the economic impact of cannabis regulations in California. And on November 15th from noon to 1 p.m., we're going to be hosting Dr. Ziva Cooper from UCLA to discuss emerging and high-potency cannabis products, the potential impact of rescheduling on cannabis research, and her work as the director of the UCLA Center for Cannabis and Cannabinoids. We'll be reposting this webinar to our website, which you can access on our link tree listed here, and also on the QR code on the right of the screen. The link tree should also have links to our other social media, which you're invited to follow. You can also sign up for our newsletter by using the QR code on the left side of the screen. We'll leave this page up for a few minutes so people can link as needed. Finally, a big thank you to the audience for being a part of this event. We look forward to more. Have a great weekend, everyone, and take care.